Every boundary I set in my 20s was either too aggressive or too soft. It took years to understand that a boundary isn't a wall. It's a clear line with a clear consequence about what you clearly value. How does a boundary function? Well, it's not a demand that someone else change. We can often get confused and say, I'm putting up a boundary by telling someone else what to do, how to think, how to feel or respond to me, but that's not actually a boundary. It's simply a statement of what you will and won't do. It's a communication of your own capacities and desire to fulfill those given a certain situation. The locus of control is entirely yours. You have to know who you are, what your limits are, what you care about, what's worth taking a risk for. And all of that actually informs what boundaries you set, how you set them, and with who and what context you set them in. But why do sometimes boundaries not stick or be respected or taken seriously? Well, firstly, there may be a place you're coming from that's reactionary and more of an impulsive response to someone else rather than a coherent and grounded communication of your values. An example of this is you may be in a conversation with someone and they may say something triggering or hurtful. And instead of figuring out why that's the case and how to best respond, you just say, oh, yeah, well, I'm not going to talk to you for a day, or you're not allowed to do X, Y, and Z anymore. And this is often something that parents can struggle with because it moves from actually disciplining the child to punishing them. And we get this example modeled and then we use it in our relationships. And essentially, anytime there's a high stress or emotional situation, we call it boundary setting, but it's really not. Another reason boundaries don't stick is because we initially state them, but then we don't follow through on them. Again, this can often happen in parenting where a parent will say something the first time, but for whatever reason, valid or not, they don't follow up on that commitment or that word. We can often do this in our lives with people where we come in hot and tell them, this is what you can expect from now on, or this is what I'm going to do. And we don't follow up on that. And that's because in the moment, we're looking for safety and security, often certainty. And so we try to say something with that spirit. But unfortunately, it takes discipline and consistency to actually follow through and live out that boundary. So the way other people interpret your boundary when you set it is they're not serious. They don't know what they're talking about. This won't last. Lastly, this is a difference between consequences and threats. So, threats are about punishment. It's saying to someone, I'm going to do this thing that will create unsafety to get the response that I want. It's essentially penalizing them for not aligning with whatever expectations or desires that you wanted in them. Consequences are about self respect. That's an honest and articulate reflection of something that was done or said wrong that needs to be made right. Just like Newton's third law of motion says, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And so when someone does something to you that violates your personhood, your values, or what you've stated you need in a situation, then that requires some sort of honest and direct response that communicates why that shouldn't have happened and the consequences of that happening. And this is really important because it teaches us essentially from a social perspective what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. When we get away with things or we don't respect what the person is communicating in the moment about how we hurt them, how we've crossed a boundary, how we've disrespected them, we become antisocial and we create a true sense of disconnect and unnecessary chaos when it's actually an important moment and an invitation for us to own up, take responsibility, and better understand the person that we're talking with. In short, threats damage relationships, boundaries protect them. Now, some guys struggle with people pleasing or the nice guy syndrome because for them, boundary struggles are usually about managing other people's emotions, reactions, and expectations. The missing ingredient is the ability to let someone be unhappy with you, knowing that you're going to disappoint them, but you're not selfish, you're not too much, you're not demanding. As long as you're saying something in a forthright, respectful, and understanding manner, then you've done nothing wrong. And none of us like getting feedback or having to adjust the way we're doing things. We don't like change. We don't like to be wrong. And often when someone communicates that we've either crossed a boundary or that they need to set one, the immediate interpretation can be, well, what's wrong with me? How can I prevent that from happening? Instead of seeing it as an earnest way of repair or connection with that person by hearing what they have to say, and instead of immediately making it about you and how you're perceived in their eyes, compassionately trying to understand what they're communicating and why it's so important to them in a way that actually helps strengthen your relationship. And it's okay. People are going to be let down. The point is that you do not compromise who you are and protecting that person within reason in a way that authentically shows up and shows who you are. Now, this nice guy pattern is the absence of limits, which creates resentment that comes out in passive aggression, emotional withdrawal, or eventual explosion. And so, what can happen is this nice guy will let the boundary get crossed and crossed and crossed, and they don't say anything. And over time, it pents up. They start resenting and disdaining that person. And instead of standing up for themselves and communicating, hey, you hurt me, or don't do that, or this is what you can expect moving forward, they essentially allow themselves to get bulldozed and then they explode in random moments. Now, I'm not saying be aggressive. I'm not saying to attack the other person and use the word boundaries as a power dynamic. Boundaries function appropriately in relationships where there is a mutual trust and understanding that each of you will have boundaries you need to set and boundaries that the other person needs to understand. And as long as there's that going on, it's going to be okay. Now, what happens if you try to set a boundary and someone doesn't respect it and they are dismissive or rude, etc.? You want to assess how many times is reasonable to try to set the boundary before I feel exhausted or unsafe in this dynamic or proximity in the relationship? So, an example would be, let's say you start to get to know a friend and they are a little too jokey about a particular aspect of your life. And you say, hey, just please don't joke like that. It's actually not funny. I've really struggled with this particular thing. And they're dismissive. You want to flag that. It doesn't mean you don't ever share something again, but then the next time you try to share that, if they continue to do that, then that's a sign that they're immature, that they don't really want connection, etc. So you want to create space between that person and just clock, okay, they're not really a safe or trustworthy person. And so I'm not really going to open up to them. Now, this gets complicated when it's with people who have been in our lives a really long time or family, people who aren't going anywhere, ideally. And in these cases, it's a long game. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and just forget about them and the relationship and say, well, screw them. But you also don't want to continue to allow the maladaptive behavioral pattern to continue. And so, what you want to do in these situations is ask yourself, what is setting a boundary to start to change our relationship look like? And that might be limiting the amount of time you spend with that person, the amount of emotions that you exude or express, or the amount of vulnerability you share and let them into in that relationship. Now, at first, this should be more subtle and just be on your end. But if the relationship is important enough, then a conversation is necessary at some point. And the way you can go about that conversation is something like, Hey, was wondering if we could just chat about our relationship and some things, some dynamics within it that I've been thinking about. I've noticed often when I do this, you do this. You want to give concrete examples for that person, and then you want to share how it makes you feel. And when that happens, I feel disrespected, I feel belittled, I don't feel seen. And so moving forward, it would really mean a lot if fill in the blank and then you share a boundary or something that you need. Now, depending on that person's openness or resistance to hearing you, you may need to be more direct and forthright with the boundary. So at first, it's offered more as an invitation and a reciprocal kind of thing. And so it's something like, it really mean a lot if you didn't cut me off and you let me finish talking before you jump in. And then at the end, like, is that fair and reasonable? Can you understand where I'm coming from? Right. Now, if that person, again, is resistant or they start dysregulating and putting the blame on you or the shame on themselves and saying, well, I can't do anything right. Of course, you're going to say that, or I guess I have to walk on eggshells with you, whatever it is. That's their own shit that they need to deal with. That's not on you. And so, what you want to do is acknowledge you can understand how they feel, but be confident in what you need and how you can get that through the boundary, through what you value being expressed appropriately. Be like, you know what? I hear you. I can understand that. But moving forward, you really need to let me finish sharing. And of course, the same you can expect from me. So, within reason, not that all boundaries should be equally reciprocal, but many times, if you can do something similar in their mind or eyes and what they need, it's going to go a long way. You got to start with you. You got to figure out, what are my boundaries? What are the things that need changing, the dynamics that need shifting in my relationships with others? What does that look like? And what is the next step in executing that? Last thing I'll say is, just like a physical boundary, the higher the boundary or more intense it is. So just imagine a really tall wall or an electric fence or a moat or all these things. The intensity or comprehensiveness of the boundary reflects the thing it's protecting, the value of the thing within the boundary itself. And so things that are more worthwhile, we go to greater extents to protect. So just think through, what really means the most to me. What do I care most about? And how can I protect those by having the clearest and most comprehensive boundaries in those areas in my life and with those people that are closest to me. And then you work your way out. So you want to just go through and start from the center, the areas that mean the most, that you need the most protection or safeguarding in. And then you can work your way out to less risky, less safe situations. All that said, boundaries are really powerful. Don't use them as a defense mechanism or reaction, but use them as a real clear and effective manner to better your interpersonal relationships with others, communicating your needs, what you value, what's best for you, and learning how to listen and do the same for others in a way that makes you closer. And that is the irony of a boundary, is at its best and functionality, it makes the relationship be closer and more connected, not further away and distant. It all depends on how you see it and what you do with it.